top Polish officials when their plane crashed in Russia on Saturday. Lech Kaczynski's body was flown home to be met by his twin brother Jarosław before being transported to the Poland's presidential palace, where it will lie in state for a week. I'm going to now take you live there to the scenes outside the presidential palace in the centre of the capital, Warsaw. These shots coming in live to us a few moments ago. In fact, we were seeing the massed crowds of people who are maintaining a vigil outside the presidential palace, where the president's body is now going to lie in state for probably up to a week. An intense day of emotion for everyone in Poland, but particularly so in the capital, Warsaw. Well, Al Jazeera's Alan Fisher is live now for us from the capital, Warsaw. Alan, over to you.
Well, you can see the scene. There are still tens of thousands of people here on the streets of Warsaw. Many asking, you may ask why they're still here, but they feel they need to be somewhere. They need to do something to express their shock and their sadness at what is being going on here. There are many scouts here from the youth organisations around the country who are helping gather the candles that are being brought by the crowds and placing them out into the ground in front of the presidential palace. In fact, you can see a few of them moving in front of our camera now. This has become a bit of a congested area. I'm going to move to the side and let these people who are trying to help the public just move through. You can see there's quite a few of them trying to do the best they can for the thousands who want to show somehow they've been affected by the events of the last 28 hours or so. This has been a day in Warsaw of grief, of mourning and of shock, but it's also been a day when the president came home.
An awful homecoming as Poland grieved the remains of its president, Lech Kaczynski, returned from Russia on board a Polish military flight. At Warsaw's main airport, his twin, former Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczynski, led high officials of state greeting the coffin. And then, under police escort, the cortege made its way slowly through the swollen streets. For most Poles, there was no more urgent business this weekend than paying their respects.
I think it is the duty of Warsaw citizens to come here because those in the rest of the country cannot pay their respects.
I think it's the duty of every Pole to come here, to be here today.
I was not personally a supporter of the president, but a tragedy is a tragedy. The patriotic spirit has brought people onto the streets today.
Tens of thousands had gathered outside the presidential palace, where the procession eventually arrived. Mr. Kaczynski's body will lie in state in a private chapel here. The date of a funeral has yet to be announced.
People have reacted very spontaneously. They haven't been told what to do. They've put out flags of mourning and they've gone and put flowers outside the president's palace. Really, the only analogy, I think, is with the death of Princess Diana, in a sense. I know maybe it's not appropriate, but this is the kind of feeling people have taken it very personally.
This is a country now in the grip of a massive outpouring of public grief. But as they think about their loss, they may also consider the gains of the past. In another time, in another country, perhaps such a tragedy might have left a dangerous power vacuum. But Poland is a stable and functioning democracy, and there's no sign of that changing. Across the nation, at the stroke of noon, amid the wailing of sirens and pealing of bells, there'd been a very noisy minute of silence. But this crowd had stood in near silence for hours anyway, trying to come to terms with how this happened and what it means. Tadeusz Mazowiecki was Poland's first freely elected prime minister.
We will
really miss all those people, but the country is functioning the way it is meant to. A huge gap has been made by this tragedy, but the country will recover.
Sunday marks the start of a week of mourning. There'll be funerals to come, 96 of them. Eventually there'll be elections and appointments, trying to fill great holes that have suddenly opened up. But that's for another day. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, Warsaw.
Alan, of course, the president was quite a divisive political figure, but Poland itself is a very proud country, isn't it? And it wanted to appear unified today.
It does, and speaking to people out on the streets, some of them have even said, look, I don't support the president, I don't agree with his politics, but this is a day for patriots and a day for Poles to come together. And I think that's what we've seen. I was asked earlier on, what do I think his legacy will be? And I think his greatest legacy, unfortunately, will be in death, because he's been a very divisive figure. He's created a lot of anger and a lot of hostility in Polish politics, but now people are saying that despite all of that, he was still a Polish hero. He was a patriot, someone who believed deeply in his country. And they believe that now perhaps politics should stop being as aggressive, as divisive, and perhaps they should look for consensus to try and bring this nation together more closely than it has been before. And that may be his legacy in years to come.
It is, of course, a day of mourning, Alan, but this is a country that now does have to hold a presidential election within 60 days.
It's something they will have to think about. They have to announce the date within 20 days, and then within 60 days they have to hold the election. Now, candidates were already being put in place. There is a difficulty for the President's party in that many of the senior figures were on board the plane with him that went down. He was thought that he would either not stand or certainly stand no chance of being re-elected. So now they have to go through this process sooner than they thought. It will be a muted election campaign because of this tragedy, and that will loom large, and certainly we will see none of the hostility we thought we would see. The President has in his gift many positions, including the Army Chief of Staff, so many of the spots that have to be filled can only really be done once we have a new president in place. This is going to be a difficult process for Poland, but it's one that will start tomorrow when the financial markets begin. Of course, we lost the head of the National Bank. The money markets are expected just to act normally, although there will be probably a very slight dip. But it's all part of Poland getting back to normal. It may be a week of mourning, but for many, many of the thousands here, it will also be a day back to work. And they have to get over what has happened in the last 24 hours.
Absolutely. Alan Fisher joining us live there from the capital, Warsaw. Thanks, Alan. Well, of course, the investigation into what caused that crash is continuing, and Russian authorities say preliminary analysis of taped conversations between the plane's pilots and air traffic control indicate the aircraft had no technical problems. Well, David Learmount is safety editor at Flight International magazine, and he believes the Polish jet's pilots may have put themselves under too much pressure.
There was another aircraft which tried to get into the same airbase just before this aircraft did, and that pilot decided to divert to another airfield. The pilot of the Polish aircraft was advised of that decision having been made by another pilot. I can tell you this, though, when you're trying to do a job like this crew was trying to do, to deliver the president of your country to a very important an event, which is very, very important to the national psyche of Poland, you're feeling under tremendous pressure to do your job. Now, if the pilot knew that he was low on the approach, but believed that he could see sufficient to keep the aircraft safe, it's very tempting to try and get down below the bad visibility and see if you can land. And I have a suspicion that this is what the pilot was trying to do, and this is what brought us to tragedy.
Well, there's plenty more on this story over on our website. You can also read Alan Fisher's blog. The address is ever blogs.aljazeera.net. Alan is also on Twitter, and his address there is twitter.com/Alan Fisher.
Now, it's been